All right, welcome everyone. So today we're going to talk about some what I think are interesting questions surrounding money work and the purpose of both. So this is kind of going to be a two-part service where today we'll talk kind of about the theory, and then next week we'll talk specifically about personal finance, specific things that you can do to enhance your financial situation, how to manage money, certain pitfalls to consider. But first we're going to talk about what it all means, because I think it's kind of important to be first grounded in the why and then get into the specifics of the what. So we've all heard the saying that time is money, right? Now, when you break that down, what they're usually referring to is that we shouldn't be wasting time on spurious activities or entertainment that we could be working and earning money, right? That's sort of the idea that America is built on. But is time money or is money time? Right? What is the purpose of money itself? So some different theories on it, but there are kind of three major purposes. So one is it's a means for trade, right? It's a lot easier than carrying around a goat or gold bricks or whatever it happens to be for barter or for another form of trade. It stores value, right? Something that's generally accepted to have value and that you can store and transport it. And then also it serves as a standard of value, right? So a dollar here is a dollar somewhere else, and we know what that equates to in terms of stuff for the most part. But when you look at money, what we use it for, especially in today's world, a lot of times it buys us time, right? So when we talked about in the happiness service, people above a threshold of about $75,000 don't gain any more happiness. And that's because for the most part, they can pay for the things that require a lot of their time, right? So they're not having to fix a lot of their own stuff. They can afford other people to do that. And so that's what money really buys us today, is it buys us time, and particularly it buys us time for leisure, right? Whether or not we can afford to take a day off, right? If we have a good enough job, we can afford to take time off. We generally get sick leave or paid leave. Or we have money to then invest in a vacation or something fun. So what we're doing is paying for time. We're working really hard, killing ourselves by some measures, to work for the money to pay for the time for leisure. There's a great parable out there of the Mexican or South American fishermen. There are different variants of the story, Caribbean fishermen. Where basically this fisherman goes out every day. He goes out and catches fish in the morning. He comes back in the afternoon, he goes out fishing with his grandkids, he comes back in the afternoon, cleans the fish, gets it ready, goes in, he's got a small little restaurant by the beach. He cooks up the fish and sells it, and makes enough money to live on and spend time with his family, and he enjoys what he does, right? And so an American businessman comes in and tells him this long story about how he could, if he worked a little bit harder, he could get more fish and have enough to hire maybe a second boat to get more fish and grow the restaurant business, hire some more people and get a manager and do all of these things and then grow it into a business that sustains itself. And so eventually one day he could spend his time going out in the morning, fishing with his grandkids, come back, spend time at the beach in the afternoon, and then maybe in the evening, going to one of his restaurants, right? So this point of this parable is that it's depending on what your goals are with work and with money, a lot of times you can do more with less, right? Not get caught up in this grind of getting more money to have more house, to put more stuff in. So with that idea in mind, I want to go through a couple of different topics, some of them political, some of them just economic, to help us better understand the mind space around money and work. So one is taxes. Taxes are always a great topic of discussion, right? Everybody loves taxes. And it's something to me that is really important because we often have that idea that all taxes are bad, right? Somebody's taking my money, right? So what are the purpose of taxes? Well, it kind of aligns with the purpose of government, right? So you got to pay for the certain things that government is supposed to provide. And I think the minimum of those, you could argue about the different agencies and missions and whatnot, but the basic premise of government is you protect basic rights, right? Common defense, common infrastructure, right? So the things that don't belong to anybody in particular, but they kind of take care of, interstates, etc. Governing, right? So the process of creating and refining laws, representing the people, etc. Collective trade, and then promoting stability. And that last one is kind of the catch-all, right? So the goal of government is to promote stability so that its citizens can live out their lives peacefully and arguably in the pursuit of happiness. So taxes then are effectively a payment for a collective good or a service, right? So again, you can argue about the amounts of those things, the administration of those things, what is efficient, and what things government should and should not be in. But taxes as a concept is simply a payment for service, right? In America, we are generally secure in our goods, right? For the most part, people aren't, there aren't warlords rampaging through, and the mob generally doesn't go through and demand insurance for, you to live in an area, right? We're fairly secure in our things. And so we pay the police, and we pay to have the general stability and cultural stability that allows us to do that, right? Pays for education. Now, I would argue that our education system is terrible at using that money in an effective way, and it could be done much better. But education is directly tied to crime outcomes, right? So ideally, you want to be investing a lot in education to prevent crime, which then prevents instability. So I wanted to throw that out there as just an idea in itself. That's what taxes are, and that's kind of their purpose. Now, I think we should be very critical of how they're collected and how they're spent. But the idea that there should be no taxes, it may be possible with certain kinds of technology and automation. But whether it's money or time or whatever it is, you don't get something for nothing, right? There's no such thing as a free lunch. And so we have to figure out where we want to invest our money in alignment with our goals. So like I said, that last one, that promoting stability, that's kind of the catch-all. And that's where the idea of redistribution comes in, right? This idea that a lot of people have that, well, when I pay taxes, they're taking money from me to then give to somebody else. And of course, we make the value judgment that says that somebody else is less worthy than I because I did the work, right? Maybe, maybe not. It's hard to say. But I want to examine redistribution a little bit because I think it's important. So most of us think of redistribution in terms of socialism or welfare, right? People giving money to people who are poor. And there are segments of people out there that think that it's a very big problem, either from the moral perspective or the economic perspective or both, right? That people who make money and work hard, some of that money is then taken and given to other folks. So on one hand, I can understand that, right? Morally, when it comes down to building your sense of individual morality, most of us believe that when you work for a thing, when you add value to it, that's what makes it yours. That's what gives us the concept of ownership, right? And if you go back to some of the philosophers, previously, that's kind of how they construct law when it comes to possession. Right? Who owns a thing is generally who adds value to it. And so for us to then transfer that value into the dollar, right, into money, and that money to be taken from us to give to somebody else, that seems immoral. But again, I go back to the idea of taxes. What's the point of it? You're buying a service, right? So to me, I kind of consider that in terms of promoting stability, and there are some good studies out there that show that some of it works, some of it doesn't. But if you're paying for stability with your taxes, and that's being quote unquote redistributed, to me, the morality of who has earned it most is less relevant than how effective is it in promoting stability, right? I want to live in a society where I don't have to worry about people mugging my kids, for their shoes, which they can then sell to feed their family. I don't want to have to worry about that. And I know from having seen, a lot of different places around the world, that if I were desolate, in a desolate place where I could not feed my family, I would do whatever it took. No question. I would steal from people. No question at all. I would do whatever needed to be done. And that's how we're programmed, right? We're programmed for survival, right? So making a moral judgment on people based on survival, which is arguably kind of the greatest moral virtue, particularly when it comes to humanism, is promoting your own survival. You know, if we have a system that doesn't allow for people to provide for their basic needs, then to me it's a little bit cynical or hypocritical that we would then be surprised at them or look down on them when they try and do that, right? When they try and provide for themselves in the way that they feel that they can. Now, are they right? No, right? Because they're impinging on others' rights. But again, we're trying to create a system that promotes that stability because that gives us value. So when it comes to that redistribution to other people, again, we can argue about efficiency, how it's done, how to do it better, what ways actually work, all for that. But questioning the idea itself of redistribution, saying redistribution is always wrong, I think you're making I think we would be making a very big assumption there that we have not critically examined. Here's the second piece to redistribution. Most redistribution of wealth, i.e., or I should say, in another light, just looking at the transfer of wealth, almost always goes from poor to rich. The only way it ever goes from rich to poor is through revolution or government interference, right? So there's a good book called Capitalism in the 21st Century. Thomas Piketty is highly criticized and highly renowned. There's a lot of interesting theory in it, and he looks at, he's an economist, he looks at the transfer of wealth and how wealth, capital rates, so like the stock market, for instance, or economy rates, such as general growth of wages, compare to each other since the 18th century, right? So since the times of or right after the French Revolution. What he generally finds is that wealth accumulates, right? So money begets money, it takes money to make money, right? Those ideas. And then people with capital can weather hard times, right? Because they have a reserve. And then as the stock market crashes, we'll say again, they can reinvest in that market when it's low. So as the market recovers, they're the ones getting the gains. You know, look at the 2008 crash. What happened was millions of people lost their homes, the thing that they had invested their money in. And so if they had no extra savings, they had no ability to buy a new house. They were forced, basically forced into going into the rental market, which then shot up because everybody else was going into the rental market as well. But people with capital, after the market crashed, were able to buy more properties and then rent them out, buy back into the stock market, or buy more into the stock market. And that's why the recovery has been primarily been in the top half of the wealth distribution or income distribution, not the bottom. So when we're thinking about redistribution of wealth, right, I think a lot of times politicians particular politicians supported by interests want us to think that we're giving away all this money to the poor, that we're giving away all this money to other countries without reason, right? When the ultimate reason is stability. When in fact we're subsidizing things that don't need subsidies. Whole industries, people that lobby, right? So commercial subsidies, for instance, are sugar. We know sugar kills us now, and yet $4 billion a year go to the sugar industry to keep their prices at a very specific minimum. Farming, right? A lot of farming subsidies, right? They say that, oh, well, we need to keep the American farmer, there and growing. But in fact, most of that money goes to huge industrial corporations and giant agricultural farms of people who are making plenty of money. Oil and transportation industries also get subsidies. And they're also allowed to be monopolies, right? So that's kind of the second piece is government protected monopolies. So communication is a great example. Who loves their cable company? Nobody.
It also supplies the security forces for the Department of Energy.
Right.
IMCO,
Yep. And then again, transportation. So those companies are allowed to have monopolies. So what we're really doing is taking taxes from people with less money, let's say people with middle income, high income too, but also middle and low income, and then giving those to corporations or interests that really don't need it. So I wanted to offer that as a point of thought. When we think about redistribution of wealth, do we automatically make that biased judgment to say we're giving money to poor people, or do we think about kind of the grander idea when it comes to wealth redistribution and how it should work? And then it comes back to that idea of stability. Are we promoting stability with these methods? Does it promote stability to basically allow people with money to continue gaining money until there's such a divide where we end up in revolution? Look at the current political system. Regardless of who people voted for, a lot of the people with angst are people without money. Right? So the Trump supporters, a lot of them are poor, white, and lower middle class Americans. And people who voted Democrat or say they're Democratic tend to be poor, both white and non-white Americans. And if this continues, right now we're setting up a conflict between those two groups, when in fact those two groups want and need the same things in terms of their basic needs. And so we've set up this false conflict because we don't understand the ideas of taxes and security and providing stability for our nation. So here's the next thing. When we have such unequal wealth distribution, what we have, and this has come up throughout time, in the run-up to the stock market crash of 29, in some of the early days after slavery was abolished, you had wage slavery, right? So you paid people so little, or you forced them to buy things at your company store, for instance, that you never allowed them to accumulate the wealth that would give them the bargaining power to demand equal representation or fair wages or living wages, if you want to call it that. And you think about today, what's today's version of that? It's college, right? People have to go to college, spend all this money because there's huge amounts of inflation in college costs because everybody is trying to go, because we've allowed licensing to say, oh, well, you need a degree for all of these jobs, when truly you don't, right? And so we have this crazy inflation going on today where people are locked into a job that they have to take because they have to pay for their college debt, because you can almost never get rid of it, even through bankruptcy, that they'll be paying on for the rest of their life, working whatever job they can find. That's essentially, they're enslaved to the system. Maybe not one job or one boss in particular, but the system has created a path for them that never allows them to live the quote-unquote American dream, where you can earn enough to buy your own house and be financially stable. So a lot of people talk about the living wage and the minimum wage and what that would do if it were raised. It's kind of impossible to know, right? There are some studies that say a wage increase would not dramatically decrease jobs. There are others that say it would dramatically decrease jobs, depending on the amount of the wage increase. But here's some stats. So minimum wage, in terms of purchasing power in 2018 dollars, adjusted for inflation, minimum wage peaked in 1968 at a purchasing power of $11.77 an hour. And if it had been indexed for inflation over the course of the minimum wage, it would have been $19.33 in 2017. Minimum wage right now is $7.25, unless higher through the state. So when you think about that, and we'll get into, well, should jobs be worth that much? Like, is working at McDonald's worth $19 an hour? That's a great question, right? And that's something that we can talk about. But should people be forced into that sort of system, right? Because we have, particularly in America, we have this idea that if you're not working, you're worthless, right? And if you're not working, quote unquote, a real job, although it'd be hard to define what that real job is, right? So I've worked jobs where I have taken apart and rebuilt and cleaned machinery as a public relations consultant, as a communications repair person, at a movie theater, at a marine store, right? Which one of those is the real job, right? Ultimately, we should be looking at what things add value, and that kind of gets into this next point. There's a book out there called Bullshit Jobs. David Graeber is the guy's name, and he looks at the theory of work and which jobs we actually need, right? So a lot of people would think of socialism again in terms of jobs that don't really need to be done, right? Because one of the goals of socialism is full employment, right? Everybody does something and they're all contributing toward sort of the national product, if you will. But what's interesting is even in America, we have a lot of jobs that no one needs, like there isn't a function for, right? There are industries, I would argue, that have no purpose. When you look at the function, they're a manufactured need. So when it comes to why do we work, and you go back to the kind of our mission as the church, that's to advance and protect humanity, right? That's what we're doing. So what things provide value to humanity? You know, I would argue it's things like scientific research, increasing productivity, providing for basic needs, right? And a lot of those things the market does, but then in a lot of ways the market creates these desires, and particularly because of a lack of education on the part of consumers, things like cosmetics, fashion, and middlemen, right? Experts. Industries have been allowed to become so complicated, law for instance, that it's almost impossible for a regular person to do that. And so they have created this, basically just a translator of English to English, just legal English to regular English. To then, we have to go pay a lot of money to do something which arguably could be done just through a discussion, right? Conversation. We come to a conclusion on what it is we're negotiating, right? We write it down, right? And there are now AI systems that can help you do that, create legal contracts very easily, right? But we still have this entrenched market where they want their cut, right? Everybody wants their cut, and that's the idea of the bullshit job, is that of the people who produce, everybody wants their cut. And if you can insert yourself in the middle of distribution from the government or a purchase from a consumer to a corporation, you get your cut by being in the middle. So what we should be doing is looking at our jobs to say, how are they adding value to humanity, right? We talked about some of those things we could eliminate. I'm not a big fan of cosmetics, to be honest. I kind of get the appeal, right? Everybody wants to look better, right? But that's a want and not a need. And it's a want based on a misunderstanding of the self, I think, right? I look exactly like I look. If I put, stuff on top of it, like even clothes, honestly, fashion, like the fact that I'm wearing this, is something that's been set as the standard that says that I'm trying to represent a certain level of, maybe it's class, maybe it's education, maybe it's whatever. Right? I always like the Fight Club line that people wear leather clothes that will last the rest of their life. That's functional. That's one of the reasons military service to me is a good idea, just because you wear one uniform, you wake up every day, you don't have to decide what you wear, you're good to go. But then beyond why we work, right? So we work to make money so we can provide for our families, advance our position, etc. But what if we actually have everything we need today to provide for our basic needs? Right? There have been studies out there that have said there's enough food in the world to feed everybody. That we can produce enough to take care of everyone in the world, but we don't. Why? Well, over time, systems evolve, right? So systems like capitalism and socialism, etc. And we not only for their functional value, but also for their perceived value, their cultural value, in how we value what, like I said, what work is and how we think about other people. They have their hang-ups, right? So what if we rethought the purpose of economy and the purpose of government to be, at the very basic level, provide for people's needs in a collective way, with the purpose, again, not of inherently just giving things to people, but providing stability. What if we all had enough energy and food and water? Right? And whether or not it's ideas like universal basic income or just literally providing goods and services, what if we had everything taken care of and we knew that we were stable as humans, right? We're going to be able to take care of our families, we're going to have shelter, and then beyond that, we can work toward things that interest us and produce value. This is the perfect example to me. So back before we had a middle class, right? So back in the day of aristocracy, who discovered all of the scientific advances? It was people with money and time, primarily the time because they didn't have to make money, right? Because it was handed down to them, and the leisure and the education to do it. They were all aristocrats. They were all people who wanted to sail the world and didn't have to worry about farming to pay their lord for the tax that was on their head and were basically starving their entire lives. It was not those people. So when people say, oh, well, people need to have a job for self-worth or, psychological needs or whatever it happens to be, I think we can see that that's not true. When people have the time and the resources to be able to pursue what they're interested in, they create value. And not only did those people create value, they created the system that changed the system, right? The entire Renaissance was built off of the ideas of those people. And so how can we have a new Renaissance? And by investing, to me, it's by investing in the people, because who knows where the next genius is, right? Is it a poor kid in an inner city? Is it a starving person in India? You look at a lot of the people that come over and succeed here, and it's people who've gone through hardship, and they see needs in the world. It's not the people who are relatively comfortable and toe the line and do what everybody else does. But even so, you look at a lot of the tech geniuses, none of those people were really poor growing up, right? They had parents who could afford, garage tinkering or to send them to Harvard or whatever it is. There are rare exceptions. But for the most part, even those people had the time and the energy and the money to not do the standard thing, to not be working at McDonald's. So there's like this idea of post-scarcity, that we're actually at the point in the world now, although some people think it might be in the future. We might be at the point in the world now where we have enough. We just need to figure out how to reconfigure the system to provide it. Again, I don't have the answer. I can't tell you from A to Z how that would work. But if we start thinking in that way, maybe there is enough. Maybe I don't have to hoard everything. Then we can start to get away from things like having a big house to put stuff in, right? Because that's essentially hoarding is what it is, right? We want to make sure we have enough for our family. So we need to make sure we have enough money to get a big enough house, to build a castle, to put stuff in so that we can do the things we want to do. And a lot of that's driven purely by consumerism. So what happens then when we move past the consumer world? When we get away from the growth market to maybe a stable market? There's some theories out there on that. It's definitely going to hurt the market, but how are we then resilient to that? And I think what we do is we build basically a human community economy. We're using the technologies and advancements of the last multiple thousand years, and knowing what we know now about psychology, community, tribalism, we start to build communities, ideally centered around a church such as this, of about 150. In each of those 150, or groups of 150, is able to provide basic things. They're a fully self-sufficient community, but networked with other communities for resilience, right? You still have specialization and expertise. But basic things like food, water, shelter, power, basic manufacturing are all local. So there's this machine out there called the RepRap, which is a self-replicating 3D printer. Basically, you can, once you have the 3D printer, you can use it to build another 3D printer. And there's this concept out there that once you can do that, which we already can, that we're in that post-scarcity world. I was looking up the other day, you can buy a metal sintering 3D printer that can produce like aircraft grade parts for 60 grand, which seems like a lot for an individual, but imagine a community bought 60 grand is not that much. And if you could recycle your own metals, which most people could, especially because there are landfills everywhere full of that stuff, you could build everything you need, all the little gadgets and tools and things that you would need for a community, especially if you consolidated those things. So instead of everybody having their own work garage, you had one, right? Essentially like a makerspace. You could have everything you need. Now that takes a significant amount of rethinking how communities interact, who owns things, how they work, etc. But it's a different concept that could get us past some of these shortfalls that we currently have. And again, church is the center. I'm not saying it has to be this church. I'm kind of partial. But one of the reasons we formed this church as a church and not just as a meeting group or a whatever is because church does provide that value. It provides the center for a community. It provides a place where people can go, where if something's going wrong in their house, they have a sanctuary. Or you can have a common meeting space to come through and talk through issues. You've got people who can offer counseling. You've got resources. So I think something like that idea of small, and you can have a huge city with these small communities that are organized in districts or precincts or whatever you want to call it, that are responsible for themselves. As I talked about last week in environmentalism, Detroit's doing this, where we're having community greenhouses. A lot of places are doing this with communal gardens, where we can grow the food we need to provide for our basic needs. Right? You might not have all the luxuries that you want in bad times, but you have the basics. So what do we do about this now? This seems like a really big idea, really far in the future, but how do we start working on this today? So first, learn about post-scarcity, open source production, and fabrication and food production at the local level. Just go read about it. It's really interesting stuff. I find it fascinating. Having been a welder and a machinist before, I think it's very cool that you can kind of produce everything that you need on a very small scale. Another thing to do is to downsize. Look at what you have and then figure out what you need. And that's not to say that we're going to live a Spartan existence without entertainment and whatnot, because you need elements of that. Well, I should say that. You don't really need it. You can get by without it. It just does improve quality of life, right? We enjoy it. But think about what you need in terms of space, what you need in terms of comfort, what you need in terms of furniture, right? You're like, well, I need room to host. Well, in other countries, they get a bunch of throw pillows. That's what they sit on the floor. And to be fair, we're not used to that level of discomfort, but it doesn't take that long to get over. We can make do. The last thing is something I don't like doing, but will anyway, just because it's kind of a necessity, is to donate. So we actually now have a link on the Facebook page and our site to be able to donate. And we have very specific goals that I'm going to say right now, and I will eventually put out there to publish, because we're going to have an open ledger, basically. So as we do take in donations, we're going to say, basically show, just like you would look on your credit card statement, here's the money and here's where it went. So to start off, we're going to just do more in terms of the marketing piece so we can grow the church. So we want to invest in a slightly better camera and then some marketing funds for Facebook to get the word to folks who don't know this exists. Because I've heard plenty of stories so far from people who, for instance, have just moved away and found out about it. Like, that's amazing, you guys finally started a non-theistic church. Or for people who are here and said, I wouldn't have heard about this except for, Facebook or whatever it is. And then eventually the idea is to actually buy or lease or do whatever a church building. Because once we can do that, as great as it is to be mobile and light, we can start investing in the kinds of things, the community programs, the education, the makerspace, and show that to the community and say, please come out here, learn about this, learn about what it is that the vision that we have for the future that we think everyone fits into. So it's a call to action for today. As always, we'll end with our gratitude. So this week, I'm particularly grateful. I got to spend yesterday evening painting with my kids. So last week we'd done a paint and sip thing, or painting with a twist, with a bunch of friends over. I've forgotten how much I enjoy painting, even though I'm not good at it. It's just a fun thing to do. And I thought it'd be good to do with my kids. And so we had to sit down and paint with the kids, and it was just a good time overall, and good old family time. So I appreciated that. And then next week, I'm looking forward to writing some awards for my team. And so once I get those out of the way, I'll be happy to get those in, because we've accomplished a lot. So I was grateful for them and looking forward to that being over. So does anyone else have anything they're grateful for this week?
I had a lot of fun getting out of the house.
Yeah? Grateful for Marina coming.
I always like.
And,
So getting out of the house?
yeah, we had some fun with the comedy show and the Jazz Blues Festival. I'm looking forward to, I'm not looking forward to moving, but I am looking forward to getting out of my apartment.
Yeah. That'll be good. Okay.
Nice. Is it recording?
Yeah. So we're doing what we're grateful for.
Me?
Sure.
I slept good this morning.
There you go. I'm always grateful for sleep. It's a good thing.
Yeah, I go to bed at midnight, after midnight. Then every morning I wake up at 5, so.
You got to sleep in a little bit?
Yeah, so this morning I slept. Then I chat with Jen.
Yeah.
Then I'm here for you. And I want to eat lunch. So I had a good week.
Good.
I'm in a lot of stress still, but I'm getting there.
Good.
Trying to work out every morning. Go to YMCA. Yeah, get back in shape. And, just less stress when you work out,
Yep, that's true.
When you like yourself, life seems better.
Yeah, it's easier.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good way to channel negative stress and
Yep.
things like that, to turning it bad into a positive.
Yep.
I've also stepped up my crutches from like 150 to 200 this week. Went from like a maintenance level back with losing.
Good.
So grateful for that. And maybe this week I'll be able to spend nothing the hurricane and bad weather this past.
Yeah.
Change directions and such.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks y'all for coming. Oh, do you got one?
Yeah, I was grateful to spend time with my two youngest grandkids. My younger granddaughter turned 9 today. So
Okay.
got to take them to the library and take them to McDonald's, take them to Walmart, get her a birthday present, and went to the park. It was still as hot as ever. They wanted to go to the park. I was grateful that I got to do that.
When did
I'm
she
very-
turn 9?
She turned 9 today.
Today? Oh,
Yeah, the younger grandkids. I got 2 older ones. So, and looking forward to Swim for Life this week. Done it the past 2 weeks. I did it last year. It's teaching second graders swim safety.
Okay.
At the Y.
nice.
Awesome.
So
It's
it's all
Wednesday.
Caterpillars. What's that?
Where?
At the Y.
What is it?
YMCA.
Oh, okay.
The new one.
Yeah, it's where I go every day.
Yeah.
You should know.
Yeah, I don't know how it is.
So I'm looking forward to that again. Teaching second graders water safety. So
Wonderful.
that's a blast. So.
Awesome. All right, well, thank y'all for coming. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week.